Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out the range to talk about the Sig P320. Now this is one of the Max Michel custom shop guns in 9mm. It's an X5, but 9mm is a great millimeter, but it's no substitute for 10mm. And today we're going to show you the new Sig P320 XTen. Pretty nice shooting, but it's no 10mm. Ah, 10mm, the ultimate millimeter. Let's take a look at this gun. When you get your new P320 XTen, it's going to come in a standard Sig box just like this one. Inside you will find the pistol wrapped in this blue plastic bag, the spare magazine wrapped in this clear bag. This magazine will not come loaded from the factory, and the gun will not come with a red dot sight on it. Inside, you'll have this around your trigger guard, your owner's manual, and some offers to buy stuff and some Sig swag to stick on a door, something like that, safe door. And of course, then you have your lock underneath the foam. So pretty standard packaging, nothing super special about this particular version of the gun, other than it is in 10mm. When you first pick the gun up out of the box, both Jason and I noticed that the gun feels a little bit more nose heavy than a standard P320. That could be perception. We will do some measurements here, because I did notice in trying to find a holster for the gun, there were some comments on Reddit that were going around, and one of the people on a Reddit thread had contacted Sig and asked them if the gun was compatible with X5 holsters. And Sig sent back a very legalese type of response, which said that some of the components are a similar dimension on the X10 versus the X5, but they are different enough that they require their own holsters, and Sig recommends using a holster specifically made for the X10. And I found that to be an interesting statement, because the gun certainly visually looks almost identical to an X5 in terms of dimensions. So in the next segment, let's take the gun apart, compare it to a 9mm version. I do have a 9mm holster back there to try it in, and see if the gun is truly the same size as the X5 and if the components are interchangeable. A lot of folks ask me, how can I get involved in the firearms business in that particular community? And one of the best ways to do that is to become a gunsmith. Every gunsmith I know is just overbooked with work. It's a very good living. And so if you would like to become a gunsmith, you need to go to a gunsmithing school or become an apprentice for an existing gunsmith. But Modern Gun School is an accredited college that also works with veterans in the GI Bill, where you can go and get a degree from accredited college in gunsmithing and then go out and start your own gunsmithing business, which I think is a really great option. Again, throughout my entire life, gunsmiths have always been able to earn a really good living, assuming they have a really strong work ethic. So please check out Modern Gun School. I do have a link in the video description below. This holster I had picked up a long time ago as a universal holster for guns that were oddballs but had pick rails on them so they could put lights. And this holster is a Black Hawk holster that's holding the X10 snugly in place. It has a thumb drive on it. When you push the thumb drive, the gun comes out of the holster. What the holster is locking onto is the TLR1 light. So whatever gun I put this light on will work with that holster. 1911s, P320s, Smith & Wesson M&Ps, it doesn't matter. If it has a rail on the bottom and it can have a standard TLR1 sight mounted on it, this holster will work with it. But it's big, clunky, and less than ideal. So I wanted to figure out what was different about the gun and what was similar, so I could work with my friends over at 4Bros, which are literally just down the street, who manufacture holsters, and see if we can't get a holster made for this gun. Right now, there's nothing out there that I can find. So we decided to take the X5 apart, get some measurements, take the X10 apart, get some measurements, and see where they were similar and dissimilar. But the first test was easy enough. That was to take my X5 holster, which comfortably fits the pistol, and try to insert the 10mm after I take the light off, and see if it fit. Because when you look at the two guns side by side, you cannot visually see a difference between the two. You would assume that they're identical dimensionally. But when I put the 10mm in the X5's holster, it will not seat. It's thicker. So that prompted us to take some measurements. we measured the rail thickness and the grip thickness at several points between the X10 and the X5, and we discovered the frame externally and dimensionally was identical. The only difference between the two that we can find in terms of the frame is that the X10 obviously accepts a 10mm magazine and the X5 will not. The hole in the grip frame is just smaller. So I thought, well, okay, so now we know that, the grip frame itself is, externally the same. What about the trigger groups? Are the trigger groups the same? And so I had taken the trigger group out of this pistol. Let's pull that out. And laid it next to the X5 trigger, which is here on the top. And again, they look dimensionally identical. I thought, well, these triggers will swap between the guns. And when I went to put the X5 trigger, you can tell by this lightning cut in the trigger, when I went to put the X5 triggers in the 10mm frame, it dropped in. I'll get it here in a second, promise. It dropped in, but when we put the magazine in, it would not seat. I thought, that's weird. The rails, everything seemed to be the same. We can put the X5's slide on this pistol. Everything seems to swap and fit, but the magazine will not work. And so we took a closer look. And if you look on the underside of the trigger groups, the 9mm on the trigger bar has a little bit more material on it, which is cut off on the 10mm. And this is giving the 10mm mags clearance to fit between the trigger bar and the magazine and fully seat in the weapon. When you put the 9mm trigger in there, it will not work, and it seems to be only this trigger bar that is keeping it from working. So I thought that was interesting. Then we took measurements of the slides on the width, and this wound up being 1.06 in width, and the 10mm was 1.08, 2/100 of an inch thicker in the slide, which makes sense because the slide just feels heavier. It's hard to believe that just a couple hundredths of an inch would make that big of a difference, but you can physically feel that difference. And that is just enough where it will not allow it to work in existing X5 holsters. Now, I could take heat to this Kydex and heat this up a little bit and push the X10 in, and then it would form fit it to the X10. And perhaps a leather holster, you could just get wet and force the X10 into it, and it would fit in there over time as well. But it looks to me as though the answer is get a holster specifically made for the X10 if you want it to work optimally. If you guys follow the channel, you'll know I can pretty much break everything I touch, not just new stuff, but old stuff. I intended to open today's video with me shooting the 10mm that turned me on to the 10mm in the 90s, and that's a Smith & Wesson 1006 you see here. This gun's 30-some years old, and yeah, I went to load up my 9-round single stack magazine, got the 9th round in there, stuck it into the pistol grip, and when it's seated and the top round touched the bottom of the slide, applied just a little bit of extra downward pressure, it broke the foreplate, the old polymer foreplate, just dry, rotten, brittle. It popped off, and the spring, magazine follower, and all 9 rounds just went falling right out the bottom of the gun. So I destroyed a very rare, hard to find, and expensive when you do find the magazine for my old 1006. So I can break the new stuff just as readily as I can break the old stuff. Speaking of new stuff, let's quickly go over some of the features of the X10. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because the X10 is just like pretty much every other P320 out there in terms of features. So first of all, the guns are very ergonomic. I've already mentioned that the grips are the same size on this. So if you're transitioning from a 9mm, you want to pick up a 10mm, you're not going to have a really big, thick grip like you would, like say on a Glock going from 9mm to 10mm. The gun's very ergonomic, shoots very nicely, has a decent trigger. But it has that striker fire trigger, which is kind of a rolling break. It doesn't have a really solid shelf and then breaks, but that's something I've gotten used to with the P320s and the P365s. We have forward and rear slide serrations that are aggressive enough where you can easily operate the gun from either the front or the rear. We have ambi fire controls, or not really fire controls, slide, stop, slide release, I should say, on both sides of the gun. We have the takedown lever on the left-hand side, and then an end-user reversible magazine catch, which you can move over to the other side if you're a left-handed shooter. So it's a left-handed friendly gun. 1913 rail across the bottom for accessories like the light. You'll notice that this one has a nice bright front dot here on the front sight, and then tritium inserts back here on the rear sight, and the rear sight stays on the slide when you take off the mounting plate for the red dot sight. This is something that's evolved with the P320 over the years. If you take a look at the M17, M18, when you take that rear plate off to put a red dot sight on it, you take the rear sight off with it. Early P365s, same thing. Now they're cutting them so that the rear sight and dovetail remains on the slide, so you can put suppressor height sights on the gun if you want to. Shooting the gun. We've primarily been shooting the gun with this 180 grain Federal ball range ammunition, and it's about the same velocity as 40 Smith & Wesson. It's a relatively mild 10 millimeter load. But we also have some of this Federal Trophy. It's a bonded bullet with a jacketed soft point round, and this is a 180 grain bullet doing 1,275 feet per second. So it's warmer than the range ammo, and then to step it up a notch from there, this Buffalo bore, which is the stuff I like to carry in 10 millimeter. This is 180 grain jacketed hollow point. And this one's doing 1,350 feet per second. So this one's hotter than the Federal hunting load. So let's go ahead and load up 4 rounds of the Buffalo bore, the really hot stuff. Then we'll go to 4 rounds of the 180 grain hunting loads, slightly not, or just a little bit underpowered from the Buffalo bore stuff. And then we'll do 4 rounds of just range ammunition. And we'll give you an idea of what the recoil looks like going between these 3 different flavors of 10 millimeter, mild all the way to the hottest that you can find. All right, guys, here we go. First, the 4 rounds of just the range ammunition. And now 4 rounds of the Federal hunting 10 millimeter. Definitely warmer. And now 4 rounds of the Buffalo bore, the warmest stuff I have. Okay, so there's a big recoil difference between the standard ball stuff that we typically shoot on the range and that Buffalo bore, but it's still quite manageable and very ergonomic. That big grip helps to absorb that recoil impulse. And keep in mind, the hottest 10 millimeter out there is as powerful as a 357 Magnum, so it's no slouch. So the P320 XTen is definitely a very welcomed addition by me to the P320 family of guns. This Romeo 2 sight, I'm going to talk more about this in a future video because there's a lot of features with this sight that really kind of warrants its own video to talk about all the different features, some of them that are very interesting, and it's why I went with this particular red dot sight. So we'll talk about that in a future video. If you're going to look for one of these, the prices online vary from $9.99 to $11.99 out there, just depending on who has them in stock. And because they're so new, it's hard to find holsters for them right now. And of course, its prices are going to be high until the market kind of reaches saturation, and those prices will start to come down on the new X10. So do I recommend it? Absolutely. I think it's probably the best 10 millimeter on the market right now, and I absolutely love shooting it. Guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel, the best way to do that is to become part of our Patreon family. There is a link in the video description below. You'll get direct access to me. I answer all private communications and some other perks as well. So please consider becoming part of that Patreon family. Right here on YouTube, got that little join button underneath the video player you're watching right now. Mash that join button and you can support us right here on YouTube in the age of demonetization. And last but not least, guys, please swing by and check out coppercustom.com. Thank you for 14 years of support, and we'll talk to you guys soon.